Have you ever stopped to wonder how long you'll really live after 60 or 70? Not just in years, but in moments that matter, days filled with laughter, mornings where you feel strong, nights where your mind rests easy. For most of us, those decades creep up quietly, a mix of hope and dread, and we don't always notice the signs our bodies and minds are sending us. Right now, as you sit there, your own life might be whispering clues about what's ahead. Some folks sail into their 60s and 70s like they're just hitting their stride, sharp, steady, surrounded by people they love. Others feel the weight of time pulling them down, a little more each day, until they barely recognize themselves. What makes the difference? Science says it's not fate or luck. It's about 9 signs, simple, powerful markers that can predict how long you'll thrive in this next chapter. And this is where Margaret's story begins. Margaret Ellis lives in a quiet corner of suburban Chicago, where the streets are lined with oak trees and the air carries a faint chill even in late summer. At 67, she's the kind of woman you'd picture as the heart of any room: warm brown eyes, a quick smile that used to light up her face, and a voice that once carried the gentle authority of a nurse who'd spent 30 years tending to others. Back then, she'd stride through hospital corridors, her white sneakers squeaking on the linoleum, her hands steady as she adjusted IVs or held a patient's trembling fingers. She was the one who knew how to calm a storm, whether it was a panicked family in the ER or a kid scared of a needle. But that was before retirement, before her husband, Jim, passed away 2 winters ago, before she started feeling like the life she'd built was slipping through her fingers, quiet as a shadow. These days, Margaret's world feels smaller. Her little brick house, once buzzing with Jim's booming laugh and the chatter of their grandkids, sits still now, the silence broken only by the hum of the fridge or the distant bark of her aging beagle, Rusty. She used to love this place, the way sunlight spilled through the kitchen window onto the oak table where she'd sip coffee and plan her day. Now that same light feels harsh, spotlighting the dust on the shelves she hasn't touched in months. She's not sure when it started, this slow unraveling. Maybe it was the first morning she woke up and couldn't remember where she parked the car the night before. Or the afternoon she stood in the grocery store, staring at a can of soup, unable to decide if she even wanted it. Or the evening she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror, her shoulders hunched, her hair thinner, her eyes dull, and thought, who is that? It's not that Margaret wants to give up. She doesn't. She's fought too hard in her life for that, raised 2 kids on a nurse's salary, kept her cool through countless emergencies, held Jim's hand through every chemo session until the end. But lately something's shifted. Her legs feel heavier when she climbs the stairs, like they're carrying a load she can't see. Her mind drifts mid-sentence, leaving her fumbling for words she used to pluck from the air without a second thought. And her heart feels tired, not from grief alone, but from a creeping fear she can't name. She's starting to wonder if this is it, if the best years are behind her, if the rest is just a slow fade into the background. One crisp October morning, Margaret sits on her porch, a mug of tea cooling in her hands. Rusty flops at her feet, his gray muzzle resting on her slippers. The neighborhood is waking up. A jogger in a bright red hoodie streaks by. A school bus rumbles down the street, kids' voices spilling out the windows. She watches it all, but it feels distant, like a movie she's not part of anymore. "What happened to me, Rusty?" she murmurs, scratching his ears. He tilts his head, his big brown eyes meeting hers, and for a moment, she almost expects him to answer. She doesn't know it yet, but her body's been trying to tell her something. Those heavy legs, that foggy mind, the way her days blur together, they're not just getting old. They're signals, subtle but real, about how long she might have left and how well she'll live it. Science backs this up. Researchers have spent years studying people just like Margaret, folks in their 60s and 70s, some who flourish well into their 90s, others who falter far sooner. What they've found is that it's not about genes or money or even sheer willpower. It's about 9 signs, measurable, everyday things that show how your body and brain are holding up. Margaret's about to stumble into this truth, not through a doctor's chart or a fancy test, but through her own life, one shaky step at a time. And it starts with a walk, or rather, the way she doesn't walk anymore. She used to love walking Rusty around the block, the two of them weaving through the neighborhood, her pace brisk, her breath steady. She'd wave at Mrs. Carter pruning her roses or nod at Mr. Jensen tinkering with his old Chevy. But now? She barely makes it to the corner before her knees ache and her chest tightens. Last week she tried taking Rusty out, and halfway down the driveway she had to stop, leaning against the mailbox, her hands trembling. "I'm fine, boy," she'd said, more to herself than to him, but she wasn't. She'd read somewhere, maybe in one of those health magazines stacked in her living room, that how fast you walk after 60 can say a lot about how long you'll live. She'd brushed it off then, but now it nags at her. Is this my body telling me something? Then there's her hands. Margaret's always prided herself on her grip, years of lifting patients, carrying trays, twisting stubborn jar lids for Jim when his strength faded. But yesterday she stood in her kitchen, wrestling with a jar of strawberry jam, her fingers slipping, the lid refusing to budge. She slammed it down on the counter, her breath hitching, a hot flush of frustration rising in her chest. "Come on, Margaret," she muttered, but it didn't help. She'd heard once, maybe from a doctor on TV, that weak hands could mean more than just stiff joints. They could hint at a body breaking down. She stares at her knuckles now, the skin thin and creased, and wonders if they're betraying her too. Balance is another ghost haunting her days. 2 days ago, she bent to pick up Rusty's water bowl, and the room tilted. She grabbed the counter just in time, her heart pounding, the bowl clattering to the floor. "Stupid legs," she grumbled, but it wasn't funny. She's seen the stats. Falls are a leading cause of death for people over 65, a fact she used to rattle off to patients with a reassuring smile. Now it's her reality, lurking in every uneven step, every quick turn that leaves her dizzy. Sleep's no friend either. Margaret used to crash into bed after a long shift and wake up ready to go. Now she lies awake, the clock ticking past midnight, her mind racing with half-formed worries. Did she lock the door? Where's that bill she meant to pay? What was that word she couldn't find at lunch? When she does drift off, it's fitful, interrupted by creaks in the house or Rusty's soft snores. She wakes up feeling like she hasn't rested at all, her eyes gritty, her thoughts sluggish. And food, she barely thinks about it anymore. Cooking was her joy once, the kitchen filled with the smell of garlic and rosemary, Jim sneaking bites from the pot. Now she heats up a can of soup or skips dinner altogether, her stomach indifferent, her taste for life fading with every meal she doesn't care to make. Margaret sips her tea, the steam curling into the cool air, and looks out at the world moving without her. She doesn't know it yet, but these pieces, her slow steps, her weak hands, her wobbly balance, her restless nights, her empty plate, they're the first threads of a bigger story. 9 signs rooted in science are weaving through her days, whispering truths she's only starting to hear. She's at a crossroads, though she can't see it yet, a place where fear could swallow her whole or push her toward something more. For now she just sits, Rusty's head warm against her foot, wondering where the woman she used to be has gone and if she can ever find her again. Margaret sets her mug down on the porch railing, the ceramic clinking softly against the chipped paint. Rusty shifts at her feet, letting out a low groan as he stretches, his joints popping like tiny firecrackers. She smiles faintly. They're a pair, aren't they? 2 old souls creaking along together. But that thought fades fast, replaced by a sharper one. How long do we have left? It's not a question she's dared to voice aloud, not even to Rusty, but it's been gnawing at her lately, ever since that stumble in the driveway. She's not ready to fade away, not yet, but she can't shake the feeling that her body's trying to tell her something. And maybe, just maybe, it's time she listened. She stands up, slow and careful, her hands gripping the armrests of the wicker chair until her knuckles whiten. The air's crisp, carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves, and she decides to take Rusty for a walk, a short one, just to the end of the block. She clips his leash, her fingers fumbling with the clasp, and steps off the porch. Her sneakers scuff the pavement, each step heavier than it should be, like she's wading through mud. By the time she reaches the corner, her breath shallow, her calves tight. She stops, leaning against a lamppost, watching Rusty sniff a patch of grass. We used to run circles around this place, she mutters, half to him, half to the wind. She remembers those days, her stride quick and sure, the world keeping pace with her. Now she's the one lagging behind. It hits her then, a memory from her nursing days. She'd read a study once, something from the Journal of the American Medical Association, about how walking speed in your 60s and 70s isn't just about getting from point A to point B. It's a crystal ball for your future. People who keep a steady clip about 3 feet per second, the researchers said, tend to outlive those who shuffle along. The numbers stuck with her. A slow gait could mean a 20% higher risk of checking out early. She glances down at her feet, scuffed sneakers planted on the sidewalk, and feels a chill that's got nothing to do with the October breeze. Is this why I'm so tired? She wonders. Is my body slowing down because it's giving up? Back home, she slumps into a kitchen chair, Rusty curling up under the table. She reaches for a jar of peanut butter, Rusty's treat, not hers, and twists the lid. Or tries to. Her fingers slip, the jar slick against her palms, and she grits her teeth, pushing harder. Nothing. She bangs it on the counter, a sharp thud echoing through the quiet house, and stares at her hands like they belong to someone else. They're trembling now, the skin loose over knobby joints, veins snaking under the surface. She used to pop open anything, medicine bottles, pickle jars, you name it. Jim called her his human can opener, always with that lopsided grin. Now she can't even feed the dog without a fight. She'd heard about this 2 years ago, in a copy of The Lancet she'd skimmed during a night shift. Grip strength isn't just a party trick, it's a window into your whole body. Weak hands mean weak muscles, poor circulation, maybe even a nervous system that's starting to fray. The study said it plain. Folks over 65 with a shaky grip are more likely to face frailty, falls, even a shorter lifespan. Margaret flexes her fingers, feeling the stiffness settle in, and her stomach twists. What's happening to me? She whispers, her voice cracking. Rusty nudges her knee with his nose, whining softly, but she barely notices. She's too busy picturing her strength leaking away, one stubborn lid at a time. The next day, she's in the living room, bending to pick up a sock Rusty dragged in from the laundry. She leans forward, and the world tilts a sudden lurch, like the floor's dropped out from under her. She flails, her hand smacking the coffee table, the sock fluttering to the ground. Her heart's racing, thudding against her ribs, and she sinks onto the couch, clutching the cushions. Get it together, Margaret, she mutters, but her voice shakes as bad as her legs. She's fallen before, a twisted ankle here, a bruised knee there, but this feels different. Bigger. Like a warning she can't ignore. She knows this one from her nursing days too. The British Medical Journal had a whole spread on it. Balance isn't just about staying upright. It's about your brain talking to your muscles, your nerves firing on all cylinders. Lose it, and you're looking at more than a tumble. Falls are the top killer for people over 65, snapping bones, stealing independence, sometimes ending it all. Margaret presses a hand to her forehead, sweat beading despite the cool room. She used to hop over stretchers in the ER without a second thought. Now a sock on the floor nearly takes her out. If I can't stand steady, what's next? Nights don't help. She's lying in bed, the clock glowing 2:17 a.m., the house creaking around her like it's restless too. She stares at the ceiling, tracing cracks she's memorized over months of sleepless hours. Her mind's a jumble, half-remembered grocery lists, snippets of old conversations, a nagging worry she's forgotten something important. She rolls over, the mattress sagging under her, and shuts her eyes tight. Sleep comes in fits, broken by Rusty's snores or a jolt of panic that pulls her awake. Morning finds her bleary-eyed, shuffling to the kitchen, her head thick with fog. She used to bounce out of bed after a 6-hour shift. Now 8 hours leave her feeling like she's been hit by a truck. She'd seen the warnings in a National Institutes of Health report once. Poor sleep in your later years isn't just annoying, it's dangerous. It messes with your immune system, your heart, even your brain. They'd linked it to Alzheimer's, that thief of memory she'd watched steal patients' lives one forgotten name at a time. Margaret rubs her temples, trying to shake the haze, and wonders if those restless nights are carving years off her future. Am I losing my mind too? The thought's a cold fist around her chest, squeezing tight. Food's the last straw. She's standing in the kitchen, staring at a loaf of bread and a stick of butter, but her stomach's flat, uninterested. She used to whip up dinners that filled the house with warmth: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a pie cooling on the sill. Jim would hover, stealing bites, and she'd swat him away, laughing. Now she can't be bothered. She skips breakfast, picks at lunch, maybe heats a bowl of oatmeal if she remembers. Her jeans hang looser these days, the belt notched tighter, but she doesn't care. Food's just fuel and she's running on empty. She'd read about this in Harvard Health, how appetite fades in older adults, how it's not just picky eating but a red flag. A shrinking appetite can mean your body's not getting what it needs: protein, vitamins, the stuff that keeps muscles from wasting away. Without it, you're weaker, sicker, closer to the edge. Margaret pushes the bread aside, her hands limp on the table, and feels a pang that's not hunger. It's loss of flavor, of joy, of the woman who used to savor every bite. She grabs a notebook from the drawer, an old habit from her nursing days, and starts scribbling. Walking slow. Hands weak. Can't balance. No sleep. No appetite. 5 lines, 5 truths staring back at her in shaky ink. She doesn't know it yet, but these are the first 5 sign signals science has tracked in thousands of people just like her. Each one's a thread in a tapestry she's only beginning to see, a map of where she's been and where she could go. Her pen hovers over the page, trembling, and she feels a storm brewing inside, fear crashing against a tiny flicker of hope. If these are signs, can I change them? She doesn't have the answer, not yet, but for the first time in months she wants to find out. Rusty thumps his tail against the floor, watching her with those steady eyes, and she takes a deep breath. Maybe this isn't the end. Maybe it's a beginning if she's brave enough to listen. Margaret sits at the kitchen table, her notebook open, the 5 scribbled lines staring up at her like a confession she didn't mean to write. The ink smudged where her thumb brushed it, but the words are clear enough. Walking slow. Hands weak. Can't balance. No sleep. No appetite. She runs her finger over them, feeling the weight of each one settle deeper into her bones. Rusty's sprawled out beside her, his snores a soft rumble against the linoleum, and for a moment, she envies him his ability to just be, no worries about tomorrow or yesterday. But she's not Rusty. She's Margaret Ellis, 67 years old, and she's starting to think these signs aren't just quirks of age. They're warnings, and there's more to the story she hasn't faced yet. It's a Sunday afternoon when the 6th sign sneaks up on her. She's at her daughter Sarah's house, a cozy split level across town, surrounded by the chaos of a family dinner. The grandkids are tearing through the living room, their shrieks bouncing off the walls, and Sarah's juggling a tray of lasagna while her husband, Mike, pours wine. Margaret's perched on a stool trying to keep up when Sarah calls out, "Mom, you remember Ellie's dance recital last month, right?" Margaret nods, smiling, but then Sarah adds, "What was that move she did at the end, you know, the one you loved?" And Margaret freezes. Her mind scrambles, grasping for the memory: Ellie in a pink tutu, spinning, leaping, but it's gone, swallowed by a blank fog. The twirl thing? She stammers, her face heating up. Sarah laughs, oblivious. "No, Mom, the dip. You said it was adorable." Margaret forces a chuckle, but her throat's tight, her pulse hammering in her ears. She excuses herself to the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face, staring into the mirror as droplets cling to her lashes. I forgot Ellie's name for a second there, she realizes, the thought slicing through her like a blade. She brushed off little lapses before misplacing keys, blanking on a neighbor's name, but this feels different. It's stress, she tells herself, the kind that's been simmering since Jim died, bubbling up in quiet moments and boiling over now. She'd read about it in her nursing days, the American Heart Association linking chronic stress to heart disease, strokes, a shorter life. It's not just her head spinning, it's her whole body paying the price. When did I let it get this bad? The 7th sign creeps in over the next few days. She's dodging calls from her old nursing buddies, Clara, who's always up for coffee, and Diane, who keeps inviting her to book club. "Not today," she texts, her fingers hesitant over the keys. Feeling under the weather. It's a lie and she knows it. She's not sick, she's ashamed. Ashamed of how slow she moves, how fuzzy her thoughts are, how she's got nothing new to say. She used to thrive on those meetups, the laughter, the stories, the way they tease her about sneaking extra sugar into her coffee. Now she's a ghost in her own life, hiding behind curtains, watching the world spin without her. She'd seen the stats once in a University of California study. Loneliness hits harder than people think. It's not just a bad mood, it's a killer, shaving years off your life. As deadly as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Margaret pulls her sweater tighter, curling up on the couch, the TV flickering with some game show she's not really watching. The house feels too big, too empty, and she wonders when she stopped reaching out. Am I pushing them away because I'm afraid they'll see me falling apart? The question stings and she buries it deep, but it won't stay down. Then comes the eighth sign, subtle but sharp. She's flipping through the Sunday paper, a ritual she's kept since Jim used to read the sports section aloud. There's a crossword in the back, one she used to breeze through, four-letter word for hope. Easy wish, but today she's stuck. Her pencil hovers over the grid, her brain grinding like an engine that won't turn over. Five-letter word for river, come on, Margaret. She squints, rubs her eyes, but the letters blur, the answer slipping away. She tosses the paper aside, her chest tight with frustration, and mutters, "What's wrong with me?" She'd read about this too. Nature aging had a piece on it. Mental agility, the ability to think fast and learn new things, isn't just a luxury after 60. It's a lifeline. People who keep their minds sharp through puzzles, classes, even a new recipe cut their risk of dementia by 30%. Margaret stares at the crumpled newspaper, her hands clenched, and feels a pang of loss. She used to be quick with a diagnosis, quick with a joke. Now her mind's a rusty hinge, creaking under the strain. Am I too old to fix this? The ninth sign is the hardest to face. It's not one moment but a slow dawn rising over weeks. She wakes up one morning, or maybe it's afternoon. The days blur now and lies there, staring at the ceiling, the same cracks, the same shadows. Rusty's at the foot of the bed, waiting for her to move, but she doesn't. There's no reason to. No shift to rush to, no dinner to cook, no one to call. She pulls the blanket higher, her limbs heavy, and thinks, why bother? It's not sadness, not exactly, it's emptiness. A hollow space where purpose used to live. She used to leap out of bed, ready to save lives or just make Jim's coffee. Now her days are a flat line, no peaks, no valleys, just a gray stretch of nothing. She'd come across this in the Journal of Gerontology once. Purpose isn't fluffy self-help nonsense. It's science. People with a reason to get up, a hobby, a connection live 7 years longer on average. 7 years. Margaret lets that sink in, her breath catching. She's not living, she's drifting, a boat unmoored, and it's pulling her under. When did I stop caring? The question hangs there unanswered, until the world gives her a shove she can't ignore. It happens in the backyard late one afternoon. She's out with Rusty, tossing his tennis ball or trying to. Her throw's weak, the ball barely rolling past the patio, and she steps forward to kick it. Her foot catches a root, and down she goes, not a hard fall, just a clumsy tumble into the grass, her knee banging the dirt, her hands scraping the ground. Rusty bounds over, licking her face, but she's frozen, sprawled there, the sky spinning above her. Her heart's pounding, not from pain but from fear, raw, jagged fear that claws at her chest. She sees it all in a flash. A bigger fall, a broken hip, a hospital bed she never leaves. No, she gasps, pushing herself up, her arms shaking. Not like this. She staggers inside, collapsing onto the couch, dirt smudged on her jeans, her breath ragged. Rusty nudges her hand, whining, but she's lost in her head. The notebook still on the table, those 5 signs glaring at her, and now she adds 4 more. Can't handle stress. No friends. Mind's slow. No purpose. 9 lines, 9 truths, each one a brick in a wall she's built around herself, or maybe a cage she's locked herself in. She'd known about falls from her nursing days, how they steal lives, how they're tied to balance and strength and everything else she's losing. But this is her wake-up call, loud and brutal. She sits there, the room dimming as the sun dips low, and feels the storm inside her cresting. Fear's there, yes, fear of fading, of disappearing into a shadow of herself. But there's something else too, a spark faint but fierce. If these are signs, they're not a death sentence, she thinks. They're a map. She'd spent her life reading bodies, decoding symptoms, finding fixes. Maybe she can do it again for herself this time. Her hand closes around the pen, steady for the first time in days, and she writes one more word beneath the list. Change. It's not a plan, not yet, but it's a choice. A line in the sand. She looks at Rusty, his tail thumping, and whispers, "We're not done yet, are we?" The question hangs in the air, fragile but alive, and for the first time in months, she feels the fight stirring inside her. Margaret sits on the couch, the word change scrawled beneath her list of 9 signs, the pen still clutched in her hand. The room's dark now, the last streaks of daylight bleeding through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor. Rusty's curled up beside her, his warmth seeping into her thigh, and she feels the ache in her knee from that tumble in the yard, a dull throb, a reminder of how close she came to letting go. But she's not letting go. Not tonight. Not anymore. She'd spent decades pulling people back from the edge, patients, families, Jim, and now, staring at that shaky handwriting, she decides it's her turn. 9 signs aren't a sentence, they're a challenge. And Margaret Ellis doesn't back down from a fight. She starts small, the way she used to coach her patients, one step, one breath, one day at a time. The next morning, she clips Rusty's leash and heads out, not aiming for the block's end but just the mailbox 20 feet away. Her legs protest, stiff from yesterday's fall, but she keeps going, her sneakers scraping the concrete, her breath puffing in the cool air. Rusty trots beside her, tail wagging like a metronome, and she manages a smile. "We're doing this, boy," she says, her voice raspy but firm. She'd read it in that journal of the American Medical Association study, walking speed isn't fixed. You can build it back step by step, muscle by muscle. By week's end, she's at the corner, winded but upright, and the ache in her chest feels less like defeat and more like progress. Her hands are next. She digs an old tennis ball out of Rusty's toy bin, its green fuzz worn thin, and squeezes it while she watches the evening news. Her fingers cramp at first, stiff and stubborn, but she keeps at it, 10 squeezes, then 20, then 50. She thinks of the Lancet and those grip strength stats, how every ounce of power she claws back is a brick in the wall against frailty. One afternoon, she tackles a jar of pickles, not peanut butter, not yet in twists, until the lid pops with a satisfying crack. She laughs, a real belly laugh, and Rusty barks, startled. "Told you I've still got it," she says, tossing him a slice. It's not just about the jar, it's about holding on to herself, to her life. Balance takes more courage. She starts in the kitchen, gripping the counter, lifting one foot an inch off the ground. She wobbles, her heart skipping, but she holds it 1 second, 2, 3 before planting both feet again. British Medical Journal was right. Balance is a lifeline, and she's not letting it slip away. She moves to brushing her teeth on one leg, then washing dishes with a foot raised, her focus laser sharp. The first time she stands steady for 10 seconds, she whoops, startling Rusty into a tailspin. "Look at us, defying gravity." She crows, and it's silly, but it's hers, a victory no one can take. Sleep's trickier. She'd been a night owl in her nursing days, thriving on chaos, but now chaos is her enemy. She turns off the TV an hour earlier, swaps late coffee for chamomile tea, and cracks the window to let the night air in. The National Institutes of Health had it pegged sleep heals, and she's desperate for healing. The first night, she still wakes at 3 a.m., but she breathes deep, counting the seconds, and drifts off again. By the third night, she's out for 7 hours, waking to sunlight and a mind that feels less like quicksand. She catches herself humming in the kitchen, a tune she hasn't thought of in years, and realizes she's missed this feeling, rested, feeling here. Food comes back slowly. She's not ready for roast chicken yet, but she pulls carrots and potatoes from the pantry, chops them with shaky hands, and tosses them in a pot with a sprinkle of salt. The smell fills the kitchen, earthy and warm, and her stomach rumbles, a spark of hunger she'd forgotten. Harvard Health said it. Appetite isn't just about eating, it's about fueling the fight. She sits at the table, Rusty begging at her feet, and takes a bite. It's simple, but it's good. And for the first time in months, she finishes a meal. We're getting there, she tells him, slipping him a carrot under the table. Stress is the beast she wrestles longest. That moment at Sarah's, forgetting Ellie's dance, still haunts her. But she's done running from it. She tries breathing exercises she taught patients in for 4, hold for 4, out for 8, and feels the knot in her chest loosen just a little. The American Heart Association wasn't kidding. Stress kills, but it doesn't have to win. One evening, the phone rings. Clara. Checking in, and instead of dodging, Margaret answers. Coffee tomorrow? Clara asks, and Margaret says yes, her voice steady. She's not fixed, not yet, but she's fighting, and that's enough. The 7th sign, her loneliness starts to crack open at that coffee shop. Clara's there with Diane, their laughter pulling Margaret in like a lifeline. She's rusty at first, her words clumsy, but they don't care. They talk about old shifts, bad bosses, the time Margaret spilled soup on a doctor and blamed it on a ghost. She laughs until her sides ache, and University of California echoes in her mind. Connection isn't a luxury, it's survival. She joins their book club the next week, fumbling through To Kill a Mockingbird. But she's there, part of something again. Missed you, Maggie, Diane says, and Margaret feels a warmth she'd thought was gone for good. Her mind, the 8th sign, needs a spark. She signs up for a painting class at the community center, nothing fancy. Just watercolors and a patient teacher named Ruth. Nature aging had it right. New skills keep the brain young, and Margaret's tired of rusting. Her first painting's a mess, a lopsided tree in muddy brown, but she keeps going. Brush trembling in her hand. By the 3rd class, she's got a flower, petals soft and pink, and Ruth claps her on the shoulder. You've got an eye, she says, and Margaret beams, her mind buzzing with something new. She's not solving crosswords yet, but she's waking up, one stroke at a time. Purpose, the 9th sign, finds her in the backyard. She's out with Rusty, the grass still dented from her fall, and spots the old flowerbed Jim used to tend, overgrown, forgotten. She grabs a trowel, her hands stronger now, and starts digging, the dirt cool under her nails. She plants marigolds, their gold heads bobbing in the breeze, and feels a tug in her chest, not pain but pride. Journal of Gerontology nailed it. Purpose adds years, and this is hers. She waters them daily, talks to them like they're listening, and watches them grow. You and me, Rusty, she says, we're growing too. A year passes, October rolling around again, and Margaret stands in her kitchen, 68 now, the house alive with noise. Sarah's there, Mike too, the grandkids racing around, and Clara and Diane are setting out plates. It's her birthday, and she's planned it herself, a pot of soup simmering, bread she baked, a cake she frosted with hands that don't shake anymore. She steps into the yard, the marigolds glowing under the sun, and feels the air on her face, crisp and clean. Her walk steady, her grip firm as she carries a tray, her balance holding as she dodges Ellie's toy truck. She slept 8 hours last night, ate breakfast this morning, laughed with Clara an hour ago. Her mind's sharp enough to tease Mike about his tie, and her heart's full, beating strong. She looks around at the faces, the flowers, Rusty gnawing a bone, and feels it. Life, real and rich, pulsing through her. She'd faced 9 signs, 9 warnings, and turned them into 9 strengths. How long will I live? She'd asked herself once, scared and small. Now she knows it's not about the years. It's about this, standing tall, surrounded by love, painting her days with colors she'd almost lost. She raises a glass, her voice clear, to us, she says, and they cheer, the sound ringing out. Margaret Ellis doesn't know how long she's got left, none of us do. But she knows this. Living long isn't about cheating time. It's about filling it, fighting for it, one small win at a time. She's not just surviving, she's thriving. And that's the gift she's given herself, a lesson carved in every step, every brushstroke, every bloom. What about you? Her story asks, quiet but bold. What will you fight for today?